this is something which has bothered all of us since August of last year, if I'm not mistaken. And we discussed this in the morning session as to ways and means of overcoming this problem of penicillamine shortage. We've tried to call people of the industry who can also give their inputs during this discussion. And I think no other than Dr. John Mathai would be the best person because he's done a lot of research into this whole issue. Dr. Mathai, please.
It's a totally non-medical subject, and I think Abha
Very important.
I was the best person. Yeah, this is investigative journalism at its best. And you will have to decide whether I have a future in that field or not. Right, there are basically 5 companies in India which market, which make penicillamine, and these are the 5: Panacea, Samarth, German Remedies, VHB, and Chandra Bhagat Pharma. Of which Panacea, I think, has about 80% of the market share, and Samarth is the next best, about 10 to 12%. And so the other 3 are less than 10% altogether. So 90 to 92% are covered by these 2 companies. Now, what's the issue with penicillamine is that there was no or very limited supply, which we first started feeling from sometime in mid-July. When patients started getting, there was a short supply. The official reason that was given to everyone who inquired was that there was raw material from China, which was the supply source, was unavailable, and therefore penicillamine was not being manufactured. But the actual reason, I think, from what my sources and my readings tells me, is that it's because the drug came under price control. And I'll tell you in brief what happens when this really happens. We all clap our hands and say, fantastic to the government when drugs come under price control. Suppliers were unwilling to give raw material at competitive prices. And as usual, we are all Indians. As soon as there was a short supply, the small amount of market or the raw material suppliers in India, instead of supplying to the Indian companies, started exporting it for better prices. So these really are the ones that probably contributed, and we'll go through one of them. Now, if you look at drug regulation in India, there are two societies or 2 agencies which are responsible for it. One is called the CDSCO, the other is the NPPA. Now, CDSCO stands for Central Drug Standards and Control Organization. Now, this is headed by the person who's called the DCGI, that is the Drugs Controller General of India. And this comes under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. And what does this organization do? They prescribe the standards for ensuring the safety, efficacy, quality of drugs, of cosmetics, and all those sort of things. Regulates the market authorization of new drugs, as well as set standards for clinical trials with drugs, and also supervises drugs imports and approves licenses to manufacture the drugs. All these 3 things come under the CDSCO. Now, the second one is the NPPA. That's called the National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority. It was instituted in 1997. And the first paradox of this whole business is that one comes under the Ministry of Health, while the NPPA comes under the Ministry of Chemicals and Petrochemicals. So it's entirely 2 different buildings, 2 different organizations, 2 different ministries, and so you can imagine the fantastic coordination that should exist between these 2 organizations. And this NPPA is what fixes and revises the prices of decontrolled drugs and updates the price control list. So they look at the supply and the production. These people look at the pricing. And obviously they don't speak to each other. Now, we classify drugs in India into 2 groups. Ones that are not under price control, which form a majority of the drugs. Now, the companies are allowed to decide the MRP. The National Pricing Authority intervenes only if there is a sudden spurt in sales more than 1% over a period of time. Otherwise, they do not intervene. They just let the company decide whatever price they want to sell it. It's like market regulated. So you can have a tablet which manufacturing cost is 20 rupees. The company can sell it for 80 rupees. Nobody asks a question. Those are drugs not under price control. And then,
what do you mean by price control?
I'll tell you. Those under price control are drugs with a high market share of more than 50%. Okay? Very large usage, and they are called as scheduled drugs. Now the number of scheduled drugs in India declined over time. That was in 342. There were in 1979 there were 342 drugs under price control. And as a way of encouraging the pharmaceutical companies and industry in India, the government slowly moved out of the market. And it came down to 74 in 1995. And for 10 or 15 years, it stayed at 74, 75, until 5 years ago, the government suddenly woke up and found that the MRP of many prices were very high. So therefore, they reintroduced the concept of price control. And in 2013, suddenly the number was brought up to 347 again, which meant that companies were manufacturing a lot of drugs, making a large profit, and suddenly the drugs moved into a price control. Now, the first thing we need to address is what happened when we got into this penicillamine shortage. I think lots of people did a lot of things. I think a lot of representation went to the DCGI. So he called a meeting of all the stakeholders on September 30th, approximately 2 months after the problem started. And the companies gave two stories for why there was a shortage. And it's very surprising that the government or the DCG or nobody was aware until people like Dr. Abha and others had actually written them up and told them that, look, there's a problem, please do something. And that's when they called to make an inquiry or why is there a shortage. And the companies gave two versions. One was to say that the company in China which is having the bulk drug import license, they are not manufacturing it for the 6 months. They are trying to get an alternate source, but that source which is ready to supply us is not registered in India, so we cannot import the drug. That means the registered source, for a product to come into India, it needs to be registered in China and India. So here, the one who was registered was stopped supplying. The new company is not registered in India, therefore we are not able to manufacture. The second one says we have a valid import license from India, but they have cut down on the supplies and they are not ready to supply us with this price beyond 2018. Now what the DCGI then was to say, promise that, look, he will register whoever company is willing to supply the raw material, we will register them, and so that you can get this like a knee-jerk reaction. It wasn't a long-term planning. You get the license, you get the company to apply, and we will give you the license. Now what happened from our side? I think, the doctor side, the medical fraternity. I think Children's Liver Foundation, Dr. Abha, I think, had done a lot of work. She had written, that's a letter that's been sent to, I can't read that letter, to the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, the Minister, J.P. Nadda. There was also a write-up in the Times of India. I think quite a few papers, I think, were nice enough to put this up. This came up on August 1st, 2016, that there is a shortage. It really brought the issue, because at the end of the day, your letters have no value. If it comes in paper written by a journalist, I think the minister is likely to read it. Otherwise, probably it doesn't get read. There's also a letter written to the NPPA that I spoke to you about by Abha. Also, under the RTI, we try to get information on how we can, on what's the problem. Really that, at least tell us what the problem is. But unfortunately, I think there's very little reply that you get to many of these letters. Other efforts, I think Dr. Seema and others in Delhi tried to contact the Ministry of Health. I tried to contact the companies. Now, there's a legal supply of penicillamine available, and under price control, the cost of it is 15 rupees per capsule, okay, which is affordable. Until a couple of years ago, when it was not under price control, the price was around 28 to 30 rupees. So it was cut down to half, to about 15 rupees. So a strip of 10 tablets should now cost 150 rupees. But there is the illegal supply in India that was coming in, particularly from Russia and some other countries, which was being sold at 50 rupees a tablet. And that was available. It's basically from a Russian company, and there was a local company which was manufacturing it in Chennai, which was giving it at about 45 rupees. But there was no quality control, no bills, no name for the product. You will only get the tablets. You believe and pray that it is penicillamine and take it. Look at the alternate small companies, but they wanted more time, because penicillamine in India is a 5 crore market. So it's large, not in terms of the company, it's not a very big drug. But in terms of the individual patients, it's a very large, widely spread out need all over the country. It's not in one particular locality. 3 brands of penicillamine were checked for quality. I had got Cilamine, the Russian brand, and the Chennai brand checked in our lab in Coimbatore. I think Abba did the same thing in the Pune lab. And the percentage purity was fine for all three, whether it was the Russian or the Chinese or the Indian, it was 99%. But there were issues with dispersion and bioavailability, absorption, etc., etc. But purity of the products, all three were pretty similar. And the other attempt was to see if trientine can be imported, but import license is a process that takes at least 6 months. And it's not something that can occur over time because it needs to be sanctioned from that country as well as from this country. Now, what's the real issue with penicillamine? This is the real story. India is widely regarded as the pharmacy of the world in the last 10 or 15 years. A large supply of drugs all over the world is coming to India. Till recently, that means till 10 years ago, many of the ingredients that go into these drugs were produced within the country. That means the bulk manufacturers were in India. Now, in the last 15 years, that bulk manufacturing of these chemical industries has gone into shambles. And India's attempt to rebuild that bulk drug sector is under threat because the raw material manufacturers were promised subsidy by the government of India. And that subsidy in the last 5 years has been cut down from 750 million, which was promised, to just 90 million. So there's a heavy drop in subsidy. The government had promised to revive the industry, but that has not happened. So the government has had no supply. Now the Chinese have this is called the API, that is active pharmaceutical ingredient industry. They are the ones who supply the bulk product. Now the Chinese government actually supports and subsidizes that ministry. And therefore, their drugs are much cheaper. And it is therefore more advantageous for an Indian company to get the bulk manufactured product from China rather than buy it from India. And with low margins, over the last 5 years, our bulk producers of drugs in India have almost been completely wiped out. There's very little bulk manufacturing because of the subsidy by the Chinese government and the ease of import into India. Therefore, we are now almost entirely dependent on China for the raw materials of these products, and penicillamine is a classic example of that. Around 80% of all APIs, that is active pharmaceutical ingredient used by India's drug manufacturers, now comes from China. This is from the IDMA, that is Indian Drug Manufacturers Association. Now, after the recent fiasco with penicillamine, the CDSO was forced to ask domestic manufacturers to step in to restore supply after they were completely driven out by the low-cost Chinese formulations. Now, what the IDMA is saying now is that penicillamine is not an exception, and they have listed 12 essential drugs which are also under threat of going the penicillamine way because of this problem of cost being low, and China is not going to give us that. So the Prime Minister's office has recently asked for some changes in the pharmaceutical policy to encourage the bulk drug manufacturers. But that, I think, is going to be a time to come. The second issue with penicillamine is about essential medicines or price control. It was in 1977 that WHO introduced the concept of essential medicines. And the Indian list of essential medicines today has 348 drugs. Penicillamine was added on 9th May 2016. That means less than a year back. Now, herein there is a difference in this calculation of price for what we call as the essential drug. Earlier, it is until 3 years ago, essential drug price was based on manufacturing cost. That means the company said, look, it cost me 30 rupees, so I can supply it at 40 rupees. And the government accepted it with a reasonable margin. Today, or 3 years ago, it was changed. Now what they do is to calculate by taking a simple average of all the drug brands having a market share of more than 1%. That means if there are 5 companies which are having penicillamine in India, they take an average of the cost of those, and then they will add a 16% to that, and then that's the price. What happens then is that this shifts the price calculation from a cost-based to a market-based method. So you could have a third-rate company which is manufacturing substandard drug and selling it at a much lower cost, but that also gets factored into this cost calculation. Therefore, you will end up with substandard companies making more than what they did earlier, while the top-end company is coming down on the product. Now, price caps on drugs considered essential tend to erode the margins of the manufacturers. And therefore, the good drug manufacturers will find it unviable to make the product. And that's the second issue that came up with penicillamine. That Silamine or the Panacea or the Summer suddenly found that one, raw material is not available. Second, if they have to source the raw material from Indians or from some other country, it is unviable for them to produce. So they are officially never going to accept it, but this is really the truth of why penicillamine went off the market. So what's the penicillamine saga? It is that it's likely to be repeated with other drugs also. There are 12 drugs which are put up as potentially under threat, but I suppose the government will not act on it until actually it happens. Essential drug pricing mechanism in India needs a revisit. That if they are going to continue, it will become unviable for top-rate companies to manufacture the product. Bulk drug manufacturing industry needs the government support if they are to compete with China. And then Triantine needs to be looked at, but we are going to go through the same process because the cost is enormous, and I really don't think Triantine is an alternative to penicillamine, at least in the near future. So essentially what this is, it's all about government policy and industry, and we as doctors have really very little we can do other than talk at forums like this. Thank you very much.
This is one session where we've invited the pharmaceutical company if they want to say anything quickly. Do we have somebody from Panacea who would like to? Yeah. Just a brief.
On what Dr. Thomas just said
Is
about.
it, first of all, what he said, is it true?
I would say some part of it, not the whole part of it, because I do agree. See, the NP. Okay, now I just put it across to you this way, sir. See, the drug manufacturing, the API, is realistically not available in India. That's number one. The depensillamine is not available, the raw material is not available, and the API is coming from China. And if you would know about the Chinese, what did happen to the factory which was producing API, I can give you the story, entire story, because we have been following it up on this part. Because we were also not aware until we've been selling Silamine, I suppose, not less than 25 years from now. It was only in the recent past when the product went out of shortage is that everybody was able to know that yes, depensillamine is such a worthy drug that should be made available. This is what I can share it with you. Nobody until now never knew about it even, until last year. Number two, when it comes to the part about the API, now the Chinese, what happened with the factory of this factory was closed down by the local authorities of the drug manufacturing over there in China. And that is how the API of the Chinese company got affected and supplies got impacted to us even. Once we came to know about the entire thing, the shortage, the sufferings, we have formed a WhatsApp group. We've made numerous efforts from our end as well when this entire story came up. We did approach the government of India, and over there they did influence the Chinese government, and that is how today the same factory which was stopped by them due to some of their regulatory issues, the factory was restored, and that is how the API from the same factory is now produced and given it to us. And that is how we are able to restore the supplies today. Even today, sir, we are not able to give you as much as you are asking for. And we are still working on that same. Regarding the NPPA...
Was there a problem with the quality of that supplier?
Okay.
Was that the issue?
Yes, I was coming to that. We also got the same material which the Chennai chap got, the raw material. We rejected the same batch. And this chap has given you an impurity product of 10%. We can validate that. That same, we didn't release it. We could have also released the same Silamine, but we didn't release it. We knew that the patients are suffering, everything is. But if we would have released the impure drug to the market at that moment, Aramin is the brand, I know that. we would have released, because we have found, patients have come back to us, doctors have informed us that the results with the same product are not similar to the drug that what we provide, the quality perspective. So that's how. So today we are ensuring that all quality standards are met with, and that's how the release is, and we are taking all our efforts that today the supplies could be restored. And we have formed the WhatsApp group. Today we are supplying patient to patient. We are going to their place with, and many times we have supplied the drug free of cost as well. If that was the need, if I would say the profits were to be considered, sir, sorry to say that, we would not have worked so much, honestly.
Basically what I was trying to say is that profits are important. Because
they are important, not always.
That's
not
exactly
always.
what I'm trying to say.
Not
the
always.
point was to say that, look, we can't expect you, neither the government, nor the country, nor the doctors, nor the patients can expect you to provide it on a long term unless you get reasonable profits. And I think that must be ensured. That's what I was trying to say.
Fine. That's fine.
That's
Because
what I was trying to
we
say.
need to abide by the law. We also need to abide. But when it went out of supplies, it was, honestly, it was never this point that because it fell into NPPA, we wanted to it was actually coincidental when both things happened together.
Is there only one supplier from China? I thought
At the moment, there is only one.
Licensed.
Only one, yes.
Only one license.
Only one.
So what is the current situation? Will we get it easily with all chemists who are providing it? No, it's not so easily
No, it's
available
limited.
yet.
Yes.
It's available.
It
but
is
if you ask
available.
for 5 strips, you'll get only 2 strips.
No, ma'am. Today you get 5 versus 5.
Any
Today,
amount?
Any amount. But yes, I would also be with your point that it is not freely available.
Yes, it is not.
Freely. We have our own process of doing it. We give it to selective chemists only, so that where the patients are tagged, because today we know all the chemists where the patients are tagged. So we try to supply it to them. One, we have got a online purchase system of ours. The patient can directly order for over there, and we supply it to their place for that. So we are doing a lot of efforts from our end to restore good supplies, and I hope in the near future, coming future, supplies would be generated more and more, because the bulk manufacturer is also improving his supplies.
Can you just update us if anything is possible on Triantine, or you have not yet looked at Triantine?
No, we have not.
Yeah, I think that's for us to kind of take up.
Achit sir. Achit sir.
The API for Triantine as well as for penicillamine, and in the near future, in the next 1 year, we hope to get it manufactured within India itself, in our own factories, where the quality as well as the sustainability of the supply is ensured for both Triantine as well as Cilamine. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.